Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Noteworth. My name is Connor Eric. I am your host and manager, and I am super excited to have a good friend of mine on the pod today and another talented manager who works as an interviewer and content creator for Welcome to the Underground. She lives in Atlanta and definitely has her hand on the pulse of the underground scene, which, without her, I would not know anywhere near as much as I do without music. So without further ado, introducing Tanija. If you want to give a little bit more information about yourself and kind of why you care about artist compensation.
I work in the music scene, so it's important to me that artists are being compensated fairly, especially having my own artists, like I just want to make sure everybody's getting paid well and everything is in the artist's best interest.
Absolutely. So I guess we will jump into kind of the beginning of this episode. A while ago, Universal pulled all of their artists' songs off of TikTok. And that was something that affected around 30% of the music on TikTok because UMG is such a big company. And I didn't really talk about that in my previous podcast episodes, kind of on purpose, because I wanted to wait to bring it up when I guest on. So I guess I have a couple of questions to ask you about Universal and TikTok. How do you think Universal's decision to pull artists from TikTok is going to impact artist discovery in the short and long term, both within their umbrella of artists and also, more importantly, outside their umbrella of artists?
I think that this decision was a bad part for Universal and their artists, but for upcoming artists, I feel like it's very good for them because they don't have these competitions of people who when their music was on there, they ran the whole TikTok, like people was finding Cardi and Lana through TikTok. I think now with what UMG did, since, they are a huge music group with many labels under them. So like the majority of music being pulled from TikTok, yeah, it just benefits upcoming artists more. Like people need songs for fit pics and the people they used to go to for it, like those audios got removed. So someone who makes music or just started making music that probably has a similar music to that artist, that's a place for them now. And they're able to platform their music better.
Absolutely. And I think that people frequently forget that TikTok is a music platform. I mean, it's got a music note on the middle of the logo, and it used to be Musically, but people frequently kind of look down on artists, I feel, at least outside of our circle. I know within our circle that's not the case, but kind of from the fan perspective, look down on artists that they perceive as coming up from TikTok. Do you think that that's going to be impacted at all in the future when other major labels might follow that lead and we start to see almost exclusively smaller artists on TikTok? I mean, right now, they're basically demanding higher royalty rates because even though TikTok is the biggest social media platform for music, it only accounted for about 1% global music revenue in 2020, whereas streaming services were around 64%. And clearly, it is a big platform, but it's not really providing financial support for the artists. Obviously, it is helping them kind of market themselves at a level they haven't had access to before. Do you think that if other labels do follow Universal's lead, TikTok were to be banned? I know right now there are talks in Congress about banning TikTok if it's not sold to an American company within the next year. How do you think that's going to impact music discovery?
It's definitely gonna put a hold on a lot of things, but I again think that the whole thing with the 2012 to 20 from the indie music rise, I think that'll be like a new thing, especially for, rappers, especially. Well, not even for rappers. I feel like it'd be good for a lot of genres and, just them being independent and able to platforming their music because TikTok is like the number one place to get music. I'm not gonna lie. People talk down on it, whatever, but when your favorite artist goes popular, that's better for them. You feel me? Like they probably opened up a whole new door of fans, a whole new generation. So I feel like it's best for every genre and for every like small artist, especially. Labels, they have many marketing tactics and stuff like that, but being able to use like what you use every day, like something like TikTok, that would be huge for artists. I know like artists like Dirtball, like they blew up off TikTok and countless others that we all know. So if people
And
are able Yeah, the marketing tactics aren't like gate kept for like new artists, and we're able to find more artists that way. So
Yeah, and do you think that right now there is this connotation around artists that come up on TikTok as being TikTok artists? Although I think it's kind of silly because you see artists like Cardi, Lana, SZA, who have songs go viral on TikTok pretty much every single time they drop. Travis Scott, Kanye, all these artists who are dropping and their songs are going viral. Taylor Swift, I could name a million more. But for some reason, when it's a small artist and only one of their songs goes up, they're now a TikTok artist. Even
um
though these bigger artists have 5, 6, 7 songs that have been going up on TikTok, these smaller artists have been perceived as TikTok artists. Do you think that's going to kind of go away as the major labels kind of pull off of TikTok? Or do you think that's just going to get worse as there's an oversaturation of small artists and there's an oversaturation of, people sitting in front of your screen being like, did I drop Song of the Summer? Because I know we're all tired of seeing that. But, do you think people will come up with creative marketing strategies to actually utilize this moment? Or do you think it'll kind of just pass?
I honestly think that people are always going to have something to say. I feel like TikTok and like people blowing up on TikTok is our generation's version of like a one hit wonder, which was like it's always been a huge thing. When people chart or whatever and you hear the song everywhere, you're like, oh, I wonder if he can make us a next song. A good, example of that is like Tyler's song Water. Like people were expecting her to like flop and stuff like that just because, the first song we heard from her, was everywhere. But I feel like it does more good than bad for them because I feel like TikTok has been like such a strong influence, especially in the underground scene. People like and like the whole Slay world just beefing, and that just being like memes on TikTok. Like, I guess that is a marketing strategy. A lot of the artists nowadays are coming off TikTok anyways. It's just our generation's thing of a one hit wonder.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, though, that the benefits of TikTok's publicity marketing outweigh the undercompensation that artists go through, I guess, from TikTok? Because the reason Universal pulled their music off the streaming service is because TikTok pays artists a substantially lower amount than Spotify and Apple Music, which we already know is a substantially low number. So do you think that maybe these major labels pushing our music off of TikTok will be not only a good thing for small artists, but just a good thing for artists, period, on TikTok? Do you think it will be enough to actually push TikTok to increase that compensation amount?
I would hope so, but all of these major corporations, especially these apps, they are very greedy. But they are doing a lot for the artists. Like I said, like Cardi's probably running like 3 generations now, along with Lana, just based off of TikTok. This is like an app that kids go on more than YouTube now. And every single time you slide, there's gonna be some type of music. So yeah, it sucks for, the bigger labels, but I do feel like the newer artists definitely deserve that compensation.
Definitely, I agree. And I also had a couple of other things that I wanted to talk to you about. One of them is the role of record labels. So, obviously, record labels were introduced during a time where artists needed labels to help them turn their music into vinyls, actually produce this stuff, put it out. But now we're in the digital era where an artist can basically just upload a song to a distribution platform. Do you think that record labels are going to adapt their business model to focus on artist development and brand building rather than just kind of marketing and, I guess, product placement? It feels like right now most of the major labels are focused on maximizing profit out of their artists. Do you think these labels are going to have to start to cater more towards not only artists in terms of compensation, but in terms of creative control so these artists don't pick up and leave because they're not being paid and they're not being listened to?
Honestly, I feel like that's already going on now. People adapting, how the distribution deals are, just doing that instead of actually signing to these labels. Because the whole like stigma around like the 3C deals and people not reading their contracts correctly and things or whatnot. I think people are scared of that and just like taking their life away and not being able to like profit off of the art that they're making. But yeah, these labels are selling a brand now when they are selling these artists because streams go into merch, and merch goes, into like ticket sales and things like that. So I think they're definitely, adapting. They're gonna have to, because I feel like more artists are like, they don't actually want to sign.
I agree. And I think the same goes for distribution platforms. I mean, artists are not that they can leave the distribution platforms because they really can't. But I think
Yes.
that artists are going to be pushing platforms to pay them more because I feel like they're going to have a lot more autonomy than the labels used to. You know, an artist like Suicide Boys has been around for over a decade and they're still touring, selling out tours, huge tours. So I feel like, and they're independent, like they've done it without a label. So I
Yeah.
think that, you know, there are a lot of people that are setting this precedent showing we don't need a major label. And I've talked to you, I mean, obviously you and I are focusing on a venture right now, a music venture that kind of looks more artist centric. I guess in my last episode, I kind of dug into it a little bit. I wanted to maybe bounce it off in kind of a dialogue with you so we could kind of continue that conversation I had started last week on the pod. You know, we've talked about how important it is to center artists and label decisions. And you and I have talked about that when it comes to creating, hopefully, a label in the future, you know, a music group rather, because right now we're managers. We're kind of working on that management LLC and throwing shows and that diversified revenue stream, of course, of getting multiple kind of avenues of revenue from an artist and also getting that artist multiple avenues of revenue. I guess how talking about how we can integrate that into eventually a music group that does involve a label where artists have ownership and can make more of the major decisions or feel like they have more control not only over their art but over how much they're getting paid.
Everybody should think that these artists should be compensated for the art that they're creating and putting out. These labels are very greedy, and I'm glad that like all these music industry documentaries and all of these artists are coming out and saying, "Hey, I actually don't have any money. Like, my label owns me." So I think it's very important that everybody's getting paid equally, even after the team gets their cut. I feel like the rappers should definitely be taking a lot more home. And we don't really see that like with labels, because they do that on purpose. Whether it's like, oh, you have to, some people spend their advance all in one place, and then labels are like, oh yeah, we actually, you have to pay us for the studio time, flights, this, that, and the third, which is tricky. And a lot of these artists are very young.
Yeah,
We have artists,
I
so.
think these artists, they're being told, here's $1 million deal, $1 million advance. They hear that, they don't realize in that moment that that advance is one, just a loan, and two, something that they not only have to make the project off of and promote the project off of, but they also have to live off of. So it's not like those are two different things a lot of the time. And I think that's not communicated to artists. And so they blow their whole advance, and then they don't have anything to make the album with.
Yeah, because they're so
And
focused on like looking like rappers instead of.
yeah, and we've also talked about how the labels are, you know, taking all that streaming revenue, or I have on the podcast, I've discussed it with you. Major labels take home 70% of streaming revenue. Artists and songwriters only get around 12%, and that's a number from last year. So that's really crazy thinking about that the middleman who's not creating the product, who's not the reason people are coming to these streaming platforms, they're not the reason that people care about the label. Nobody would give two, pardon my French, shits about Sony, Warner, or Universal if they didn't have the artists that they had. It's not their brand that makes them who they are. Sure, some of them have, you know, theme parks and headphones, but like the artists are what people care about. And even, you know, under the imprints of those labels, even more so. So it's really frustrating to see that 70%, that is a jarring number of the revenue, is going towards these labels instead of going to the people who are actually making the revenue and generating the hype and generating all of the profit.
Yeah, and I want to talk about what you said about like the Suicide Boys and just them having like a very cult fan base. The Suicide Boys have a whole culture behind them. A lot of people might not know who they are, but if you know who they are, then you know who they are, and they've definitely been killing it. But that just goes to show like having a cult fan base just outweighs everything, literally.
Absolutely. And I mean, Suicide Boys, yeah, it's like, know who they are or you don't, but they have multiple songs with over 600 million streams. They have over 10 million monthly listeners. This is 10 years plus into their career, which is insane. That is sustainability that you do not hear about. And I think that it's kind of beautiful to be able to see an artist continue to profit off of their art without a major label for so long. I guess without being the center of controversy, it's really refreshing to just see them kind of coast with their fan base and genuinely build a community of people who really came up during a time where a lot of their favorite artists either aren't around anymore, sadly, or kind of fizzled out and don't make much music anymore. And the Suicide Boys have really continued on this era kind of from 2020 that nobody else really is carried on in the same way, especially since they bring other acts on with them when they tour. A lot of other acts, they do the Grey Day tour. So I don't know, they are a really good case study for someone who has just made their career last a really long time without the help of a major label, and showing that the digital era is the time to do that. I think not enough people are realizing that for sure.
Yeah, and TikTok was, the marketing tactics change like every year, every month, every, couple, Musically was it. And then, TikTok has been like the biggest thing we've seen, in our lifetime, literally. So even if, TikTok leaves, which will suck, it will suck for everybody, but, we'll evolve. There'll be something else to do, like there'll be some way to platform music. They'll come up with something. So I always just tell people, take this advantage right now as a smaller artist. Like when UMG pulled all their artists off, that was the time to start posting. Like even if you don't post on social media, if you're an artist, like just go put your stuff out there. Like people need like slideshow pictures and like fit pic, music and stuff like that. So just put yourself out there. Like you never know. Like who's the last person to like blow up on? Like Beretta. I didn't know about Beretta before TikTok. I know a lot of people did, but him going from the niche that he had to, a bigger base just off of that one song blowing up on TikTok. And he probably just uploaded that. Like he probably had he probably didn't even know that was gonna be the one,
And I've also seen artists, be taken advantage of a lot of times for that. Like I'm not going to mention by name, but I've known artists personally who maybe they dropped a song, it got a lot of hits on TikTok, they didn't have a manager, they didn't have anyone in their corner telling them what was good and what wasn't. And they kind of let that moment not fizzle over, because I wouldn't say that they're fizzled out by any means. I still think they have a fruitful career left for them. But I guess just that momentum that could have really carried off into something at that time didn't, because there isn't really support to help these artists build that momentum once they get that TikTok hit. They don't really have, anyone teaching them what to do. And also I think that in terms of just discovery, not only TikTok, but playlisting and the promotion just has such a heavy hand in things. I guess I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit in that direction. How much control do you think playlist curators have over artist discovery and success? And how do you think that impacts compensation?
Yeah, I use Apple Music, I'm not gonna lie. So a lot of the playlists that come off of Apple Music, if it's not being like sent to you or anything like that, or it's like your family and friends, or Apple isn't creating it, then I don't really see much of the playlist curators on Apple Music, but Spotify does a really good job of like putting those playlists out there. Like you can on Spotify, you can go to an artist and you can go under it and you can see all the playlists that they're in, which is great. I see a lot of your underground playlists. Like I'm pretty sure a lot of people have those, like your playlist in their library. But yeah, I see you in a lot of artists playlisting and things like that. And that also just contributes to a lot of people's algorithms as well. Like I think I started listening to Yeet Until Japan because of not just one TikTok, but like the algorithm. Like all of these people are listening to the same thing and you're hearing about this person, and Apple Music is making sure that it's in my personalized radio, because the people that I'm listening to and the people that these people are listening to, they're also listening to this. So now I'm listening to this because we're all listening to the same things. You get what I'm saying? So they do play a huge part, in who's up and like who's, just connected with what. Like Blazer doesn't sound like anything like freaking Yapo or, any of these Osama Sun, Che, all of these artists, but like they seem to all be in the same group. if that makes sense.
Definitely. And I want to take it even more to the macro level of like things like the rap caviar playlist, things like that. Those have 12 million, 15 million saves. I mean, that's an insane amount of people that you're putting out music in front of. And that's just who's saving the playlist, not including who's streaming it. So, I mean, I think that there are some artists. I look at an example, someone who came up from my hometown who kind of sprung from, I had never heard of him, into absolute huge success. And I didn't even know how he blew up under my nose. He's from my tiny hometown, and I had no idea. Bossman D'Lo. I mean, he had label support pretty early on. I know he was signed to Alamo. I don't know at what point, but I know that at least very quickly after Get In With Me, or before he dropped Get In With Me, he was signed to Alamo. And I mean, he went number one on one of the charts. I think it was, I don't remember which one, right before Carnival came out. The day before Kanye dropped, Bossman D'Lo was number one on one of the charts that I was looking at, like a Billboard chart. And I was absolutely shocked. This is someone that was, I'm not going to say nobody, because I'm sure he did have his small following, but as someone who is very very closely paying attention to music and paying attention to the music scene, specifically, I would know in my hometown, it was crazy to watch him come up that quickly and just get that mainstream success. I mean, I'm sure if I look at his streams, they'll be, he's got 4 million monthly listeners already. And
Yeah.
he was at, a couple 100,000 just a couple months ago. So it's really crazy to watch how quickly that happens, because I mean, things like playlisting you don't notice, because we look at the micro level of like these artists that have 400-500 monthlies that I personally perceive as much bigger than they are. But then you look at someone like Bossman D'Lo, and it's like he got that label support early on and he freaking blew, dude. Like, it was absolutely insane. I mean, he went gold. Get In With Me went gold. So I think that's definitely interesting. And I know that I saw that song on Rap Caviar. So just looking at like the odds of getting playlisted on something like that, who you know, and who's putting together those playlists, what the algorithm wants to do. It's a crazy combination of things, but those editorial playlists specifically, in addition to the algorithmic playlists, I think really do have a hand in actually like having a person behind shaping what's being listened to.
Yeah, I kind of saw like the whole Bossman D'Lo thing and like just him blowing off of just random people just making TikTok to his songs because the song was so good. I think his rollout is like similar to like what JT's is, but like on that side of music, the like the Facebook memes and the tweets and the TikToks and stuff like that, just based off of his lyrics that blew up and got the song to blow up. Yeah, that's a whole different side of things that you probably didn't see because you're probably not on that side of things. But yeah,
It's like the surpassing of the underground, almost the localized support of like, he came up when that song came out, but I mean, he's had local support. Like, he can go tour Atlanta, South Carolina, and any city in Florida and absolutely sell out a club. I don't know if he can do that in the North. I don't think I've seen him try, really, but it's absolutely insane to see people just surpass the underground like that in a way that just shows how quickly you can do it in the digital era, especially if you get in with the labels early. And that, I guess, also brings me to the question of, I want to ask you about industry plans, and I want to before I ask the question, kind of set the framework for what I want to ask. So people often talk about industry, they accuse people of being industry plants and say that, they've been put in the industry, they're not actually talented, whatever. But now, recently, I feel like we see this influx of talented artists that are kind of have the industry plant allegations thrown at them. Sometimes warranted, sometimes not. But I guess my question is not about who is an industry plant, but more so, how do you feel about that term? I guess I'll state my opinion after, but the term industry plant and when it's used to describe someone, because really I feel like it's just about when you get connected. It just happens earlier or later, but I want to know your opinion on that.
I definitely believe in industry plants, and it's not that hard to spot them or anything. We all don't think that they're good, and we're wondering how did they get here. And yeah,
How do you feel about, for example, people threw industry plant accusations at Ice Spice? They threw industry plant accusations at all sorts of people. Do you think that is a real way to, I guess, discredit someone's music? Like, sure, Ian and Forbats have the same manager, but does that mean that they're not putting out good music? Like, I guess it just comes down to, like, what do you fundamentally see as good or bad for the artist, for the community? Like, people could look at Forbats or Ian or, both of them and not be huge fans of what they're doing for kind of ethnomusicological reasons, which is a big word. But I think that in terms of just their sound and their fan base, they've curated it over, quickly. But people will throw that kind of accusation, industry plant, I think sometimes prematurely, when an artist is connected very early on with people high up in the industry. But I think that, who are we to question this person connecting to someone like Kanye or Cardi or Ace Rocky or one of those big titans, because those are some of the most tapped in people in the music industry. I mean, they know everything that's going on. And to think that they don't is, in my opinion, I guess naive, but I think that you could agree. But like, how do you feel about, I guess, what you consider? Because I think there's a difference between like a clear industry plant, like what were they called? The tramp stamps, those girls on TikTok a few years ago that like blew up. They were like some punk pop band that were clearly inserted. People could find their like social media and just like were able to see that they were actually inserted by a record label and they were actual physical plants. But again, more so looking at someone like Ice Spice who's had industry plant accusations thrown at her, where do we draw the line between people who just got paid attention to early on and people being an industry plant?
like I said earlier, I think it's very clear like who is and who isn't. Like the music group Flow, like they were popping before their debut album. Beyonce knows who they are, etc., etc., etc. But they were also from the UK as well. But for them to have all this attention, like right before dropping their debut album, is insane. But I didn't see any, industry plant allegations from them because I genuinely think that they're talented, and you can see the hard work that they do and that they've been around for a while. But I'm gonna say that anybody who has gotten industry plant allegation has always been an industry plant, and we all just wonder like how did they get here. Who was a really good one? I didn't really know about the term industry plants until I say like 28 when like Ian Dior came out. So
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, when I seen him and when I heard him, even before I even knew about like the whole industry plant thing, I was like, this, I don't like I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. So when, he got those industry plant allegations, things started to make more sense. You know what I'm saying? So I think that he was like a great conversation starter, like with me and my friends about, and even just like internet discourse about, what's the industry plant. And I think it was like Ian Dior and probably someone else. They, like I said, they fizzle out. They always just fizzle out anyways. So, the real will prosper and, the rest will be the rest. But I mean, don't get me wrong, they got some good bops, but it's like, how did you get here? Like when did you get here? How did you get here? And who's actually like enjoying this music? You know what I'm saying? Forbats does make really good music though, but doesn't he only have like one song out? Like that's questionable.
I guess, but the thing is like, even looking at someone like Dominic Fike, for example. Dominic Fike, he had put out a bunch of music and then he got signed. He deleted all his music off his SoundCloud, deleted all his music off his platforms. He didn't want it out. He wanted a new sound. They signed him with no music out because they knew he was talented. I mean, the kid was talented. And they signed him with no music out, and they gave him over $1 million, I want to say. And I mean, now he's a star, an absolute star. So I guess it just comes down to like the intention behind it. I guess the intention behind it for me is what it comes down to. Like someone like Ian Dior and MGK, like they came into the industry because of nepotism, because of like adjacent like, I guess, knowing people who are friends with the industry, even like a Mabu, like a little Mabu, like, you know that there's something at play, like his father has influence, but you don't know what.
I'm not going to name any names, but in the underground scene, there are some industry plants. There are some industry plants in the underground. So you're just not even like mainstream. You get what I'm saying? Let's talk
Talk
about the
talk about some of those microstructures. So we've talked about at the macro level what this looks like, these structures of power, how they integrate this into all of these different ways of bringing up artists and planting them into the industry, which obviously distills and kind of makes it harder for other artists to come up, oversaturates the industry. But talk about that at the micro level, how even at the ground level, as artists are coming up and trying to get attention from these underground accounts that have built their platforms around, oh, I'm platforming small artists, I'm supporting the community, I'm helping the underground, I'm pushing forward new artists. But in reality, it's people they're getting paid to push. It's people that they are tight with. It's not representative of what people are listening to. It's representative of what's putting money in their pockets. So talk
Yeah,
about it.
it's definitely easier like in our digital era, and we've seen it especially these past couple of months, how easy it is for industry plants to spawn. And like I said, I'm so glad that we started having that conversation, at least when I realized it in 2018, and people started calling these people out more. Even in the underground, it's very clear to see who is being pushed and who's being paid to be pushed, because they're getting a lot of traction, but they have to do controversial things or bought their music and things like that. Why can't the music just speaks for itself? Osama's son had a crazy like speed run, and that was just like based off of him and his music, like he dropped Osama season last summer, and then he followed up with that with another album in January, and just seeing like the jump before he even put out Osama season is crazy, but that's authentic, like obviously he has people behind him, but we seen his come up.
And we see, like, even in his interviews, you see him talk about working 10 jobs before, coming up. Like, there's a difference in my mind between being paid attention to early on and being thrust into the spotlight, like an Osama Son or a Dominic Fike, or the people we won't name who are, being, meticulously placed into the spotlight. They're not being, I guess, bolstered into it. They didn't have a place there in the first place. And I think that that's a lot of the time when we see kind of the issues come up with a lot of this music, like a lot of, white people co-opting black genres. That's something that is coming up a lot as a result of white artists being pushed by labels. Or when labels are pushing black artists, they're pushing only artists that uphold a very particular stereotype that they want to uphold, like the drill genre, for example. The amount of money that labels put into temporary deals to drop artists, I've talked about it a million times on this podcast, is super malicious, is super predatory. I mean, they're coming after these kids who come from pretty tumultuous home backgrounds, and they're just taking advantage of their situation. They're taking advantage of emotional trauma and making money off of it. And then they dump them to the side when they're 19, 20 years old, and they say, who's next?
Yeah, and it's really sad to see, because these industry plants get like, these opportunities that, these actual talented kids or the people that they're ripping off of, they're in their spots, and it's unfair. But like I said, earlier, you can definitely tell who is one and who's not. That's why when, there's an accusation of it, no one's questioning it, because we're all looking around like, how did we even get here? But when things start to make sense, they make sense. Like, Yeet, we've seen Yeats come up, his numbers make sense. New people that we don't really know of that have one hits pulling Yeats numbers, it's insane. We all know who Yeet is. We all know who Yeet is. Someone who, not a lot of people know, not a lot of people have discussed, should not be pulling Yeet numbers when it comes to streaming, like people people see those things. You can't hide things like that. Someone's gonna call it out, and someone's gonna be like, "Hey, that is kind of questionable." We've been seeing it a lot. Like these, it's been a conversation in the comments. It's been a conversation on Twitter. People have been making video essays on these things, and it's not even just like one particular person. It's kind of been getting out of hand. So when these labels do it, they can't do it at a rate that these blog pages do it. So that's something to worry about for sure. Especially if TikTok leaves, then we have to rely on these blog pages to get new music. But if they're not, pushing people who they actually think are good, then like what are we gonna do? Like where are we gonna get new music?
Absolutely. And I guess my final thing where I will leave off is asking you, what do you think is the most pressing concern in regards to artist compensation?
Honestly, I would say like it's not even just like one thing, because yeah, TikTok was like the lowest in compensating artists, but they were giving artists a platform that their labels could not give them. So Apple Music, I know Spotify just went up, or they started paying more, did they?
They cut
No.
it though. They didn't. They're trying to get them to, but they haven't. Yeah.
Well,
They're trying to pass a bill, but yeah.
yeah, I feel like artists should be like, they honestly should be compensated more. I don't understand why this is even like a conversation, but
I
people
guess
see.
the question is, how do you think the power dynamics will shift? Like, in what ways do you see artist compensation changing in the future?
I think that if more artists are like, I'm not signing this deal anymore, then, labels or, they're going to have to adapt. They're going to have to, be able to compromise with these people, especially if they want like their royalties and things like that. And just, artists are one thing, like the people behind them, like their producers as well, getting compensated, that's a whole nother thing as well. But I think that the digital era is changing things, and artists know that they don't have to slowly rely on labels anymore, and it's going to scare the labels. It's going to scare the hell out of them. So they're going to have to adapt. But if everybody just sticks together and, stand on their business and doesn't fold for a little bit of advance money, then we'll be okay. But if these people who don't really care about the artists keep picking them up, and I feel like artists should just come with their own team instead of having like the labels
And
give them
that's
their.
why I've talked about our music group. I mean, our approach being the artist centric label and a more holistic music group. I've talked about not only does the label need diversified revenue streams to stay alive, but I think it's so much better for the artist to have that integrated community of the people who are throwing your shows, booking your tours, the people who are putting your music out, helping distribute it, and the people who manage you in your day to day are all integrated. I do not think those should be three separate entities that are different billionaires. That just does not make sense to me. So I want to agree, and I'm super excited to launch into this process of building out a company with you that actually looks to solve these problems and looks to center artists in the industry that they are the top of. It's absolutely ridiculous that they're not making money off of the industry that is supposed to center around them. So I'm really excited to see where this goes, and what is to come of artist-centric ownership and label. Thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate you hopping on and chatting with me, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Noteworth. If you did enjoy, check out some of the other episodes. Today, we just wanted to take a deep dive into more of the social media aspect of things, how that affects artist compensation, with a couple of different, trailing off into the distances. So I hope that everyone had an incredible listen, and I hope everyone has an incredible night. And once again, thank you to Nisha for coming on, and goodbye, Noteworth.